You would think with Marvel Studios' Captain America Civil War being one of the highest grossing movies of the year, that the Marvel Comics Publishing Division would make sure that its publications were in tandem with their movies in presenting an image that would be appealing to readers. Unfortunately, this isn't the case. With the release of the most recent volume of Captain America, the first issue, you have Marvel Comics coming out with an issue that has generated a lot of controversy. And at the end of the comic, they're saying that Steve Rogers was an agent of Hydra from the start. Now, this isn't the first time Marvel has pulled this type of gimmick on readers. Back in 1994, 1995, there was a little storyline called The Crossing. And in this storyline, it was revealed that Tony Stark was an agent of Kang and that he was eventually going to become this bad guy. Now, the Iron Man character wound up killing a few people, and they eventually wound up getting killed himself and replaced with a teenage version of himself from earlier in the timeline. And the response to The Crossing back in 94, 95 was just as negative as it was right now regarding this whole Captain America Agent of Hydra controversy. And there was so much of a backlash that people just stopped buying the Iron Man comics, they stopped buying Avengers comics, and it pretty much derailed a lot of stuff. I mean, comics were already in decline from the 93 collapse, and this storyline, which was supposed to generate controversy to get readers coming back, pretty much backfired yet again. And this is what I see happening with this whole Captain America being the agent of Hydra. It's backlashing right now. A lot of comic fans are angry, and some more dysfunctional people have been making death threats, which I do not condone. But this publishing approach from Marvel's publishing division, it shows me that not much has changed regarding their publishing division. Any smart publisher would be trying to capitalize on the success of that movie by making sure that Captain America would be presented in the most positive light. He would be taking on maybe one of these bad guys like Serpent Society or Batroc, or one of these villains that in a storyline that will get people wanting to go buy more comics. Unfortunately, the publishing division's business plan is still stuck in the 1990s, and they're still using a 1990s business approach in the hopes of getting readers, not understanding that the readers that you want to get, the tweens, the teens, the kids, they don't need to see this type of version of Captain America. They don't need this type of gimmick, and this is not going to get you readers. It's just not going to get people interested in a Captain America comic. And moreover, it pretty much flies in the face of everything that readers have known about Captain America since 1941. Now, in 1941 or so, or 19 something that time period, 1940 or so, Captain America was designed to be this symbol of patriotism, the symbol of what it means, the best of America. He was supposed to be what the best Americans could be. And you would think, you would want to present that out here, especially after the success of a movie like Captain America Civil War. I mean, you would want to present the character in its truest form. You would want to create something that would be truest to the source material and something that would excite people who would be interested in going out to actually go look for these comics. But again, Marvel's publishing division, just like DC's publishing division, is still stuck in the 1990s business-wise. And because they are following an archaic approach to business, they think they have to use gimmicks and shock marketing to get readers to try their products. And that's not the case at all. The audience has changed, the audience has grown up, and they're having children, and they want comics they want to share with their children, just like they share going to the movies. I remember going to the Civil War movie last Saturday, and I saw so many families with children at that movie. And sadly, Marvel is not, just like DC, is not thinking about the big picture. They're not thinking about focusing on trying to create products that appeal to those children, just like the Civil War movie appealed to children for the most part. Because that's where you should be focusing on, making sure that your comics are in tandem, story-wise, with your movie, so that when kids go to the comic shop, or they go to the Barnes and Noble, or they head over to Amazon, they see this type of story in front of them and are ready to go out and say, hey, I saw the movie, now I want to see more about this character, that they can actually go in and pick it up. But they're not seeing that type of synergy because, again, they're still stuck in the 1990s, still trying to use gimmicks, still trying to use shock marketing, and still trying to remain on a path story model-wise that is outdated. Nobody is doing things 1990s. This is 2016. It's a time for a different business approach because the audience is a very different audience. I mean, yes, there are median age for most comic buyers is 40 or 35, but there is a bigger, larger audience of younger readers out there who want to see great comic storytelling, but we're not getting it because most people in the comic book world are still stuck in the past and they're not focused long term on the future, which is getting those tweens, teens, and kids into reading comics. The way I see it, you know, if I was the publisher at Marvel Comics, I was the editor-in-chief, there wouldn't be any Captain America as Agent of Hydra because, again, as I see it, that's not true to the character, one, because the original character was a true patriot from day one. That's core to the character. And two, it just wouldn't be there because it's just not good business. I mean, I look at how the negative impact from The Crossing and what happened with that whole Tony Stark storyline, and I saw all the negative press from that, and I see that I wouldn't go and try to do it again because that's the sad part about a lot of comic books. They're not looking at the bigger picture. A lot of them are focused on short term, and because they're not focused on long term, they can't look at that big picture and see, hey, so we tried that already 20 years ago with that Crossing. We're not going to go do that again. I'm going to have to go pull this writer's chain and tell him, look, you're going to need to change that ending because or change that storyline altogether. Now, because it's just not going to work. I know you want to try to say something about this whole cosmic cube thing, but it's just not going to work. We don't need the negative press. We don't need the negative backlash. Right now, we're riding on. I mean, you have this movie getting ready to come out, and this is just not the time for this. And that's pretty much what a good editor is going to say. Look, that's just not the time for this. That type of story model is archaic. It's outdated. Yeah, you may get some blowback from that writer, or they may get upset. But a true professional is just going to start looking around, start reading critically, and say, okay, he is right. Maybe this isn't the story. And then he's going to change the story into something more appropriate for readers. I mean, if I was writing Captain America, I would never even propose that type of story. Again, I would be doing something more in line that makes Captain America look great, like having him take on somebody like Serpent Society or Crossbones, or someone more in that range, so that the reader who goes and watches the movie goes and says, oh, that character was in the comics, and then they go out and after they watch the movie, they become a regular buyer of Marvel Comics. But that's what happens when you don't have somebody involved with a business background or a business approach. And that's another big problem with the comic book publishers today. A lot of them are focused mostly on emotion, and they're focused on what they want to create. They're not thinking about what the customer wants. They don't see comics as a commercial product. They see comics primarily as something creative, and they're going by what's emotional. But when you're in a professional business and you're selling a commercial product, you have to do what will appeal to the reader, and you have to create products that will appeal to the largest audience. And I don't see a lot of objectivity when it comes down to publishing at Marvel or DC, and I think it's really hurting them because they're not seeing the characters as and from a professional standpoint, they're seeing them from their own creative standpoint. And that's really impeded the growth of the comic book industry over the last, I say, 15, 20 years, because we need people who can see things objectively and decide, what would be best to release on an objective and business perspective. Because I look at that story, and I reference it back to the whole disaster that happened with Tony Stark and The Crossing, and I don't see this going well long term, because if you're getting this type of negative backlash regarding this one issue, then it's gonna snowball as long as it goes. Because what happens in these type of situations is, instead of people getting excited about the comic, they're saying a whole bunch of negative things regarding the comic, and then they don't want to buy the comic anymore, and then eventually some of them don't want to buy any more comics because they're looking at the creative teams and they're saying that, you know, this is how this guy's going to write, then I don't want to buy these comics anymore. And this is where editorial really has to step in. And that's another problem I'm seeing in the whole comic book business, is that editors are too afraid to step in, you know, like a Jim Shooter would back in the day, and check people and say, look, I have to make sure that we make sure that this character isn't damaged by the storyline, and I have to also make sure that we stay true to who the character is. And we're not seeing that at comic book companies these days. We have creators, you know, just out of control, doing whatever they want, and there's no editor to check in, because the editor's job primarily is to be the voice of the reader right back to the creators and let them know, look, there's a standard that has to be maintained, there's a standard that has to be kept, and the characters have to remain consistent so that once you finish writing this character, the next person can come and pick that character up and start writing their stories with them. And that's the editor's job. And I don't see a lot of editors, you know, coming in and reining people in. And that's what a good editor is going to do. He's going to sit down with you and tell you, look, you can't do this story like this because we have to maintain a level of quality for this character. We have to maintain a set of standards for this character. And the stories all have to be consistent with other stories. That's primarily an editor's job. I mean, their job is to make sure that the books that come out meet a certain standard. And when I look at this type of story that came out, it's clear to me that, you know, there was no standard in it. But unfortunately, this is the way it's been in the comic book business for the last, I'd say, 25 years. There has been no editorial standard. There has been no leadership from editorial. A lot of editors, you know, they really don't sit down with their writers and talk to them and try to get them to understand things from a business standpoint and a creative standpoint. That, yeah, you want to go in these crazy directions, but these crazy directions have lasting ramifications not only on the character creatively, but on the business overall. And you really have to watch what you do and what you create, because not only are the readers going to get alienated, but it's going to be a lot harder for that next creator to come in and pick up where you left off. Because in comics, you know, it works like this. Once one writer finishes their run, the next writer has to come in. And if they can't come in and just, you know, pick up where you left off, and they have to spend 6 months to a year cleaning up your mistakes, then that's going to hurt the flow of things, because then the reader is going to have to sit there and wait for them to fix your mess before they start telling their stories. They have to spend half their time doing a patch-up job fixing the bad storyline before they can get into their storyline. And that's, again, something that editors have to teach, you know, long term when they're mentoring when they're working with writers. And a lot of writers, again, they're not getting the guidance they need, because in some cases a lot of these editors aren't really seasoned or experienced in publishing, so they don't really understand how to, you know, sit down and also do the teaching part of writing, where they teach people about how story models and story paradigms work, so they won't make bad decisions like, saying Steve Rogers was an agent of Hydra from day one, or Tony Stark was an agent of Kang. Now, those ideas may sound exciting in the beginning, they may get people's attention, but the long term is that it damages the character and it damages the brand, and it prevents new readers from wanting to get to know this character on a regular basis. And this is something, again, that an editor has to do. And I see the big problem in your Marvel and your DC and even some indies is that there isn't that much editorial oversight. And because there's no editorial oversight, there is no set for standards regarding the character or the quality of the product. I look at this whole Captain America situation, and it's systemic of what's a big problem in comics. And that is that, again, no editorial oversight, no editorial management, and no leadership at the publishing divisions like your Marvel and your DC. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.